So I want to welcome everybody again. This is the last of our series about sustainable and vital congregations. Again, as we introduce this series, recognizing that there are challenges. We talked about finances. We talked about buildings. We talked about leadership. And so with all of that information, it's like, so what do we do about it? Well, it's time to kind of, how do we make decisions? How do we make plans? How do we do that? And we were talking in the office, and it seems that making decisions may be the most challenging. Now, facing the realities is challenging, but actually making the decisions. So as I thought about, I was trying to find a scripture that would kind of, stir us, encourage us. This is, part of our Christian life, faith, discipleship in Jesus is to make decisions and move forward. I couldn't quite find the scripture passage, but as I reflected just really quickly on, particularly the story of the church in the New Testament, think about this, right? When Jesus came, right, we're in the season of Epiphany, and, came to proclaim the message, the reign of God, not the reign of the empire, the reign of God has come near. Repent, which means change directions, make a decision. Are you going to look toward God or look toward the empire? And then he calls his disciples, right? We have the stories of calling the disciples. You're going to make a decision. You're going to follow Jesus. And we know some went the other way. Continued his ministry. And again, we know that when, after his ministry was completed, his death and resurrection, he empowered his disciples, right? Received the Spirit to do what? To continue this work. Think about the journeys of Paul. We would not have a church today if Paul had not taken that message, made a decision to continue forward. And Paul did not stay in each of those places and say, well, I will take care of everything. We talked a little bit about leadership last time, right? Relying on pastors. I'll take care of everything. He taught, he empowered, he equipped, he reminded the saints of all their gifts, and then he went to the next place, leaving the people, right, to continue to build community and to proclaim. And so the passage that I did find, just very quickly, at the end of 2 Corinthians, where Paul writes very simply, finally, brothers and sisters, siblings, farewell. I got to go on to the next place, right? Put things in order. Listen to my appeal. And throughout, his appeal has been, you are gifted. You have gifts for ministry. You have gifts for preaching. You have gifts for administration. Listen to my appeal. Agree with one another. Work together to make decisions. Live in peace. And the God of love and peace will be with you. And I just thought, the reason that we actually, with eyes wide open, look at where we're at, what are we doing with our buildings? What are we doing with our leadership? What do our budgets look like? Is so that we can continue to be the church, to use the gifts, to go back to the first sermon of Jesus, the reign of God has come near. And if there's ever a time that we need to continue to proclaim and live that into our culture, now is the time. And so to continue moving forward, using our gifts, working together to make decisions to continue moving the church forward. So that is why we're doing this work, as tough as it may be. And we cannot make decisions. We were talking about why is it so tough for us to make decisions? Have you noticed in the church, we do a lot of talking? We talk and we talk and we talk and we talk. But when it comes down to, okay, what are we going to do? Woo, that's harder. And my associate, Reverend Wetter, is going to chime in here. And we wonder if part of the reason we have a tough time making decisions is we're not clear about our purpose. If we don't know what we're doing, why we're doing it, it's tough to make decisions. And so, in order for us to actually start pulling things together, making decisions, we first need to get clarity about our purpose. And when we get more clarity about that, then it's like, okay, if this is why we're doing it, then this is what we need to do to get us there. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. This is our final session. Reverend Wetter has done this presentation. He shortened it because he's done a lot of it with different councils, helping them to do their planning and so forth. We'll give you an opportunity to, again, conversations in small groups and then bring back together. And again, how can we continue to assist and support you as you continue to be the church?
Yes. When we think about the purpose of the church, I think, and I'll share some slides in a second, but just kind of picking up where Bishop Candia kind of came to a close there. Jesus, I would say, as I read Scripture, the purpose of Jesus coming was to reusher in the reign of God, right? To open the eyes of the world that the reign of God has drawn near. It's here. That was his purpose. And so everything he did was focused around about opening our eyes to the reign of God here and now, not some future afterlife, but here. And so Jesus was real clear on his purpose. And then he gets clear on the mission and how to do it. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through tonight. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a little presentation we can walk through together. And you heard me say this before, and again, if you've been in any of my workshops, I continue to say over and over and over, the church is in transition, and it has been for a long time. And tonight we want to talk about if we can accept that we are in a time of transition, then we need to bring all this together, and we need to start making decisions about what it means for us, not only as a large church body, but individual congregations. And there is good news here. I go around and I hear people panicking all the time. The good news that is here is that God is still in control. This transition is not, I don't believe it is. It's not just happening on its own. I think God is in full control of all situations. I believe God is there ready to go. It doesn't mean God's a puppeteer, but God is in charge. And if we can live with that and understand that, then I think we can, trust ourselves to make some decisions that may be a little bit of risk taking, and we'll talk about that here as we go through. And we can make decisions knowing that we might make mistakes and things might not all work out, but that's okay too, because we're working toward God's purpose and not ours. Okay. In the book of Jeremiah, and I didn't put all this in. This is can be a much longer presentation. I condensed it, as Bishop said, but if you go to Jeremiah 18, God invites Jeremiah to go to the potter's house. And so Jeremiah goes to the potter's house, and when he goes into the potter's house, he observes that the potter is at the wheel, and he is remolding a lump of clay that has been, it says, spoiled. It didn't turn out the way the potter wanted it. And so the potter is now reshaping this clay into something new, and it turns out to be something that the potter thinks is beautiful. It's wonderful. And then God says this to Jeremiah. He says, if the potter can do that with a lump of clay, can I not do that with my people Israel? Can I not reform and reshape and remold them? God said. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. Okay. God is the one that's reforming us and reshaping us. And I think if we can, again, the message to Jeremiah is, as terrible as things look, I am reshaping my people Israel. I am doing that. Trust me. And so I think for me, this is a text that says God is in control, and be alert to what God is up to. And we'll come back to this. What is God up to in the world today? And I think all too often we kind of skip over that. And so as we begin to think about what's happening, the question isn't what do I want to do, but what is God calling me to do? What is God calling us to do in these times, in this place, wherever we are? And in times of transition, it calls for leadership. It calls for good leadership. And when I talk about leadership, I'm not speaking about managers. Managing is very different than leading. Managing is that the task of taking specific things and orderly doing them, right? And that there's a lot of us are good managers. It's tougher to be a leader. And by definition, when I say leadership, I'm talking about someone or someone's having the capacity to mobilize people to make progress on difficult situations. Okay? Easy situations, anybody will want to. People will sign up for those all day long. We need this room painted, and okay, people will do that. But when it talks about redesigning or redoing or reshaping, people don't want to do that, and so we have to figure out how do we as leaders encourage others. And we see this with DJ. I mean, Bishop, just use an example. Jesus mobilized disciples to do the work that he was called to do. We hear in Luke 4 last week, right? I have come, I've been anointed, I've been Christed, I've been Syed, whatever you want, however you want to say it, to do this work, to bring good news to the poor and so on. And then Jesus goes and he calls people, he challenges them, he mobilizes them to continue the work, right? And it wasn't easy work. Okay, so we're called to do the same in these times as we are in times of transition. And I would like to propose when it comes to making decisions and having leadership, it's going to require a few things. Leadership is that those individuals and those groups of people that are in a situation where they know what is needed, they know who's available or who can do the work, and they are clear on what decisions need to be made and why those decisions need to be made. I often, when I go into congregations and I'm there, particularly if I'm doing workshops, one of my favorite questions is to always ask, why are you here? Why are you here? And we go around the room and I get lots of wonderful answers. I come to be fed on Sunday morning. I come because I just love the people that are here. I come because this is I've been here forever. I was baptized here and this is my community. Those are all wonderful reasons to come, but it's not, but I think there needs to be a deeper reason as to why we gather as this particular faith community. It's got to be more than, well, my friends are here, because I don't have to come to a faith community to have good friends, right? So we need to figure out what is the why of why we gather. Okay, and I think it needs to be deeper than that to help us move forward and make progress on the challenges, and to be able to mobilize others, to be able to get people excited about doing things. We have to be clear on our purpose. Okay? If you're going to get me excited about doing a ministry of any type, I need to know why. That's how I am. And that's when people will usually step up, right? Oh, I can get involved in that. When I was first years ago, before I was really active in the church and I was in business, my first real invitation to ministry was by a young youth director who called me when I was out of town. I was in Salt Lake City in a motel room, and he called me. It called my house, and of course that was pre cell phones, right? And Jill told him, well, I'm not, Dave's out of town, but if you want to talk to him, I just hung up from him. He's in his hotel room. Here's his number, call him. And he called me, and that's when I learned that some people actually read those time and talent sheets, by the way. He said, hey, I was looking at the recent time and talent sheet, and you put down you might be interested in working with youth. And then I got worried because I'm like, oh man, I don't know about this. And he said, and when he described to me why he wanted me to come help as a young adult, because we were fairly young at the time, it made sense to me. He was real clear that his purpose in the church was to provide good leadership to the youth and give them role models to follow, and people that will be willing to talk to them and hear them and listen to them, not tell them what to do. And I got excited about that. I thought, now that I can do. I can do that. I can interact. And I think, that again, remember I was much younger, but he knew what his purpose was and how he was going to go about. And we'll talk about specifically what I mean by that in a few minutes, but he was clear on that. And from going from, oh my gosh, he's going to ask me to do something, to, wow, that sounds exciting, was because he was very clear on what and why he wanted me to come help. Okay. And I think all too often in many organizations, not just the church, but we're here talking about the church, we're not clear on our purpose. We don't know why we each exist, except that we've always existed because, my faith community has been here for 50 years or 80 years or 120 years. But we need to know why we're here today. What is our purpose? Purpose provides the reason we exist, okay, why we're here. It is something that lasts forever or for a long time. It's not something we change year after year. And again, when I give you some examples here in a few minutes, hopefully it makes more sense. But purpose is that thing that we never fully achieve, but we're always working at it. The reign of God is come near and it is here, but it is not fully here, right? We're in that in-between time. But we're constantly trying to make progress to unveil the kingdom that God has brought near, right? In and through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay? Purpose is also a thing that connects everybody in your organization. And again, you'll see when we talk about some of the examples in a minute. But it gives us all a purpose. It gives us all a reason to come together. And it connects all of us and gets us all working in the same direction. And a purpose statement is basically something that's the core. It's our core guiding statement. It's what we always go back to if we're stuck and we don't know why we're working on something or we can't agree on why we're doing some program. We go back to our purpose and it clarifies why or why not we would do certain things. In the church, a purpose statement or our purpose ought to be God-centered. It ought to be something we exist to do this so that God's kingdom might be revealed, right? Whatever that is. It's what God is calling us to do, not what we think or what we like. And so that calls for discernment. It calls for a lot of community involvement. It calls pulling the people together to say, let's talk about this and let's decide together what we believe God is calling us to be and do. How is God calling us to be the church today? Not the church of yesterday. The church of yesterday was awesome. We love it. We learned from it. But God is calling us to be something different today. Let me back up here. And when I'm talking about purpose, I want to also make it clear because I get this a lot. Well, what do you mean, like our mission statement or what? And I don't mean that. And I'm going to back up here. There we go. And before just to clarify, I want to give you some examples. So in 1923, I give you one non-church example. In 1923, when Walt Disney and his brother Roy were preparing to start, actually a little before that, they wanted to start a new company. And they had these grand visions. And Walt had these visions of movies and all kinds of things. One of the things that made them, and I would argue what made them so successful, is they knew they needed why are we going to do this? And the two of them together came up with this 5-word purpose statement. And this purpose statement, by the way, existed from 1923 until 2016. Unfortunately, in 2016, the Disney Corporation came up with a brand new, very corporate type purpose statement that is too long and too wordy as far as I'm concerned. But Walt and Roy's purpose statement was this: to create happiness in others. Now, I'm not saying that's a good church purpose statement, but for them, they knew whatever they did, when they started this company, they wanted to bring about happiness in others. And so movies and Disneyland, which eventually became Disney World, and now Disney World all over the place, everything they did was, if we do this, how will it create happiness in others? I think they succeeded. What do you think? I think they succeeded because before they changed it, I used to say, that's the only place I go and spend just about every dime I have. I mean, my pockets are empty when I leave, and I thank them for it because I love it, right? They made me happy. They made my family happy, okay? That's a purpose statement. For almost over a century, or almost a century, I should say, every employee of Disney knew that their job, their purpose was to create happiness. And that came from the guy walking down the street with that stick, picking up the garbage off of the main street in Disneyland, to the creator of movies or whatever. Does it bring happiness to our customers? So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about when I'm talking about a purpose statement. Let me give you some ministry statements I've worked with or have read about over the years. Um, One, this is not one I worked with a group I worked with, but their mission state or their purpose statement became to help people who are homeless, hungry, or addicted to provide opportunities for recovery. Okay, this is a faith community that felt that their calling, they came every week to worship and they gathered in community because they were being equipped to care for the homeless, the hungry, and the addicted. And in their faith community, and they were an inner city congregation, that's what they did. They figured out how to do that in a meaningful way with it. And every decision they made, everything they did moving forward from once they did this was about, if we do this, will it help us care for the homeless in our community? Will it help us care for the those that are addicted? And what kind of programs would we then offer to help those people, right? So that's what they did. One where I did work with this group, these next two I have worked with, they wanted to be a place where people could worship God, learn scripture, and serve the community. That's pretty broad, right? If you start to get the picture here on purpose statements, they're very broad. Okay. Another one was feed the hungry. Pretty simple. I mean, 3 words. Congregation where I served, our purpose statement that we had was feed the world. And I remember after the council agreed to that statement, I had a woman come in my office and she said, "Pastor, that's impossible. We can't feed the world. We're just one congregation. We have 120 people. We can't feed the world." And as we talked about it, we talked about examples. We literally couldn't feed the world, but we could begin to feed pieces of the world, parts of the world. And it wasn't, from our perspective, it wasn't just literal food. We talked about spiritual. How do we feed those that are hungry spiritually? How do we feed, so it was a very broad statement that we then worked within to create our mission and vision and strategies and programs. Okay. So those will give you some examples of purpose statements. Purpose statements are very broad. They're intended to be, and then from there you can begin to, and I'll lay out here in a second when you go through a decision-making process, give you an example of what that might look like. And as I started to say before, purpose is different from mission. Mission is your mission statement or your missional plan. That's what brings your purpose to life. That's how you're going to do it. Some would say strategy. On the corporate world side, it would probably be more strategic, right? We talk about mission plans, not strategic plans. It defines our unique ministry. It's how we live into our purpose. And it's different from vision because a lot of people talk about having a vision statement. The vision statement, again, it's not what we're going to get into tonight, but that's the thing that kind of lays out what the world would look like or what your ministry might look like if you achieve this in the future. Okay. My background, as many of you know, I came out of the corporate world before I came into ministry, and I love to follow organizations that are successful. And one of them is Coca-Cola, and John Quincy is the president and CEO of Coca-Cola, has been for a long time, and I've heard him speak and I've read a lot of his stuff, and he's big into good leadership and obviously in purpose, being clear on purpose, and then he has various decision-making models. I'll share one with you here at the end that applies to any organization, but one of the issues I also believe when it comes to decision making, we are often afraid to make decisions because we're making decisions on things where we don't really know the outcome, right? That's why we need to make decisions. We need to do something different and we need to enact it. And for a lot of us, there's this fear of loss. There's this fear of not getting it right. And Quincy, I think there's a couple statements that I've read in his articles and books over the years that I love. The one of which is people tend to worry about what might go wrong and they forget about what might go right. I hear this a lot. Well, if we do this, so and so might leave. Or if we do this, such and such might happen. Well, what if we do this and more people come or more people get involved? What if we do this and something good happens, right? What are the good things that could happen? There's always risk, but there's always positives too. And Quincy's point as he begins to talk about making decisions is we've got to stop focusing on what might go wrong and focus on what might go right. Now, that doesn't mean all your decisions will always go right. And if you follow any, in this case in Coca-Cola, if you follow some of their major things they've done over the years, you know they've made huge blunders. But out of those blunders, they've learned and they've moved forward. And so his theory always is, what might go right? And I would challenge you to do the same. What might we do better in the church if we do something different? He also talks about driving risk-taking and innovation by not being fearful of what you're going to lose, and think about what you might gain. Right? I would argue that even though the church is getting smaller these days, we see it across the board. Right? Less people are in worship. The faith communities are closing. I would argue yes, we might be getting smaller, but we are getting stronger. Okay? And we are stronger, and we're in a better position to actually do ministry. Read scripture, read the story of Jesus in the Gospels. As we read through the scriptures, we're just starting Mark, and as we read through, in these early stages, it's talking a lot about how the people are coming in droves. Keep hearing that. And then on Good Friday, hear how many are at the cross. Maybe a couple women and maybe one guy, according to John, right? Maybe the beloved disciple. There's only a few people at the cross. We got really big and then he got small. Then out of those few people, today's church exists. Okay? We might be getting smaller, but I would argue we might be getting stronger at the same time. That's the positive, right? So we've got to keep thinking that God is in control here. God's work will be done with or without us, and we want to be part of that. And we need to be clear on our purpose as we make decisions. This is one of the models that Quincy talks about a lot, and please don't concern, this purpose-driven decision-making model. It has nothing to do with that book from back in the 80s on the purpose-driven church. I don't think Quincy knew about that. Quincy always talks about always start with your purpose. If you're going to make decisions, before you make decisions, be clear on your purpose. It's what you believe in and it's your cause. You use purpose to support what you do next, and then you kind of work your way down with your strategy, or I would say your mission. That's what I would use for church language, and your tactics, or for me, I would talk about your programming and your ministries. What are those? And you get down. The problem when you start narrowing down like this, though, that's when we get into trouble, because that's when we start arguing over things. Nobody argued about being a congregation that was going to feed the hungry or feed the world. Once we got clarity on what that meant. But we did start to argue in my congregation about how we were going to do that. What was the best way to do that? And so that's where we get into trouble. But Quincy always speaks to, and in his organization, when they get to that point, they always go back to the top to purpose and say, can we re-clarify? What we're talking about, is it upholding our purpose? Is it support our purpose? If the answer is yes, then we can get in, then we begin to work our way back down again into this more specific programming ideas and missional plans. Does that make sense? And he sees this as this ebb and flow of up and down. We start with purpose. We're always clear on it. And as leaders make decisions, we get narrower and narrower. And if we start to struggle, we come back to purpose. And we just keep going, because purpose is where we'll have more general consensus. And then as we work our way down, we're constantly working toward that consensus stage of how to make decisions, and in this case, within the church. What are the ministries that'll help us grow the kingdom? What are the ministries that help us care for the hungry and the poor and the set the oppressed free, as Jesus says in this text this past Sunday? What are those ministries? And when we begin to do that, then we begin to make progress on this work of the church of bringing about the kingdom of God. Would also like to propose that in this transition, God is transforming us. God is bringing about transformation in the church. We all love what we have been. We all want to go back to the 80s and the 90s, some farther back than that. But God isn't calling us back. In fact, in Isaiah 43, God says, and before this verse here, God is speaking to the people, and he is reminding them of everything they've done. I am the one that brought you out of the land of Egypt. I am the one that caused the Pharaoh to be crushed. I am the one. I am the one. I am the one who did all of these things. And then God says, but I want you to forget all of that. And here's what I want you to remember. I am doing a new thing. And now it springs forth. And he says to the people, do you not perceive it? And I think for us, that's the transformation that's happening. God is in the midst of all of this. And if we are people of faith, can we begin to perceive what God might be up to? And can we challenge ourselves to be part of that? To see that, and God is pretty specific here. God says things like, I will bring forth rivers in the desert. I will raise mountains. I mean, those are things that we think, wow, imagine that. And God says, do you not perceive it? Do you not perceive that the changes I am bringing are for the betterment of my people and my mission and my kingdom? And so I guess my challenge tonight to you all, as we think about how do we make decisions, I can't come in and say, well, this is what you need to do. I mean, I think congregations would like me to do that sometimes, or they'll to the bishop to just come in and say, oh yeah, here's what you need to do. There's no such thing as the 7 steps to do all this. But there are models we can use, and there are models that we can talk through. And I think this is one of them that I've laid up. You can come up with your own decision-making model if you want. But I do believe that if we're going to bring about progress in the church, notice when I talk about leadership, I don't talk about fixing anything. We're not going to be fully fixed, if you want to use that word, until the second coming, right? That's when the kingdom will be at its fullest, right? Until then, we just need to make progress. We need to keep continuing as the church to work on issues of justice in the world, continue to work on bringing about equity and equality into all human lives. So we can't fix all that, but we can bring about progress as a church. We can, and even in our own little communities, right? We can, again, I get this a lot. Well, we can't fix everything. We can't do all that. That's true, but we can be part of that, and we can do something in our own communities and then assist as part of the wider church in doing things that'll also help the whole church. What I'd like you to talk about here, do you have a purpose statement? Have you talked in your congregation about what your purpose is? If not, if you do, I'd love you to share that with the folks. If not, talk about maybe why you haven't or how you might go about doing that. If as I said, if you do, make sure you share that. And if you kind of step back and you just think about it for a minute, what if we did do that? How might things be done differently in your congregation if you could be clear on what your purpose was as a congregation? Or if you're part of a community that's a parish, as a parish. Does that make sense? So do you have a purpose statement? If so, would you share it? If not, how might refocusing ourselves that help us make decisions to move forward?
People are coming back from having discussions, so we're ready to kind of hear what people have been talking about. Welcome back, everyone, and you're taking it, right, Dave?
Yeah, I'm taking it. So welcome back. So we'd just like to have a little bit of a large group discussion here for a few minutes to hear about where you're at in your own communities. So do any of you have purpose statements? Or have identified your purpose?
I'll start.
Okay, Linda, go ahead.
I want all of you to close your eyes. Indulge me for just a couple of seconds. And I'm going to say something. Let us make Christ known. That's something that we hear at St. John's every Sunday. It's a common language. We may do it action-wise differently, but I believe that our congregation now has heard that enough that they buy into it. It's part of our culture. And I believe that our treasurer, bless her heart, during the congregational meeting, handed out a page that showed 4 areas where we are actually doing that within our congregation and in the community. Laura Kuzno did an excellent job with that. I'm not sure if she's shared that with anybody in the Senate, but it was excellent.
Yeah, that's
So
I haven't seen that. I'd love to. If you'd like to share that, I'd love to see it. But that's definitely a purpose statement, making Christ known, right? That's pretty bold and it's pretty out there.
that's
Um,
short,
and it's exactly, yep,
and we understand it now.
yeah. And so your challenge comes as you make decisions on community work that you will do at St. John's there in Pittsburgh is this something that will help us make Christ known? Okay. And then you make decisions based on that. So great, great. Thank you, Belinda. I appreciate that. Others, any others? So I take it that's the others don't have a purpose statement. So did you talk about how it might help it? You know, what are some of the conversations around this notion of having a purpose statement or knowing what your purpose is?
Belinda and I'm unmuted, it looks like.
There you
Belinda
go.
and I also talked about having a listening post where council members should be actively involved with listening to others in the church and what our needs are and what we can do to help. And actually listen, not talk, but actually listen.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, offering ways to hear people, right? So I like the notion of a listening post or a listening time or sharing opportunities. But for leadership, good leadership listens, right? Um, Good leadership absorbs what that is. Now, that doesn't mean we have to agree all the time, right? A lot of times I'll have people say, well, you're not listening to me. And what they're actually saying is, you're not agreeing with me, right? So leadership listens and hears, and then our job isn't to immediately say, oh, no, or yes, but our job is to absorb that, take it in, and then work on, well, how can we accomplish this? Or does this make sense, right? But listening, Don, you're so right. Listening is critical. My deal is God gave us two of these and one of these. So we ought to be listening at least twice as much as we're speaking. Now, I'd like to say I'm perfect at that. I'm not. For those of you that know me, I love to talk more than I listen, but I have to work at that, right? We need to learn to listen and we need to listen to, and not just within our own community. So not just within our own faith community, but the outside community, right? The bigger community that we're really called to serve. What are the needs there? What are the needs in the wider community outside our four walls? Because I would argue that's our mission field, right? When we say, at the end of all of our services, most of us have the same sending or something similar. Go in peace and serve the Lord. And we say, thanks be to God. In other words, may it be so. Well, we're supposed to go serve, and that's outside those, as we leave the doors, right? And I've been to a few of your places where it says you're now entering the mission field, right? Our work is out there, right? So listening is critical. When we went through our work at my last congregation, we actually had people go out and meet with business owners, walk streets and talk to, because our church building was in the midst of a neighborhood. Several of us went and met with city council members, and literally I got to be friends with the mayor because we talked about what are the needs of this community and where can this faith community fit into that. We met with school district superintendents that we served. So we listened, and then that's how we got to this our purpose. So listening is critical. Thank you very much. Other thoughts, comments?
Dave, Ed Merkel here.
Yeah.
You were speaking about listening. I find the most difficult listening, and I maybe shouldn't say this, but is listening to God.
Yeah.
Do we ever teach our people how to discern God's will?
Good point. Yeah. Right. Because I started off with this, right? That this has to be God-centered. This is what God's calling us to do. And so to find ways, whether it's through prayer and scripture and in community, talking about what's happening, where do we see God at work in the world? How do we fit into that? It is a discernment process. And again, it's not step one, step two, step three, but it is. Listen, again, I remember when we got to that one about feeding the world, our mission is to feed the world. It was like it was an epiphany for the council as we went through this and the leadership team that was working on it, because we had the summation of all this work we had done. We had a 3-day retreat, or 2.5 days, I guess, Friday, Saturday, and we finished Sunday at noon. But it all of a sudden became evident, we talked, that people were saying, well, you notice that everything we've done well over the last umpteen years all has to do with food. And we started listening to programs that we had over the years. And finally, somebody said, just out of the blue, well, it seems like we're supposed to feed the world here. That's what it looks like. I mean, that was like the comment. And all of a sudden there was this epiphany of, oh, and I think that was listening to God, right? Through the conversation of the community, it came to light. And listen, that was a year-long process that we went through. So I'm not saying this stuff comes, overnight, but yeah. So Ed, you're right. How do we listen to God? How do we meditate in scripture in the morning? However you do that, both individually and as community. And then how do we bring that together? And that's what, I wish God, we all say it, right? Why won't God just say it? Well, God invites us to listen and to hear and learn from each other, right? I think God speaks to us through each other, through the church, through preaching, through all kinds of ways. And can we do that? And then can we lift that up and point to God, right? Others. Oh, go ahead,
So
Bishop.
I was just, thinking as listening is absolutely important, but like you said, listening does not mean that we're agreeing with everything. What I find, at least, as been working across, when it comes to then, okay, listening and then making decisions, it's that final kind of,
Right.
we've listened, but we seem to be stuck. And I gave the staff this example. So I've been on, it's been like 2.5 years. I'm on a church-wide, we're redoing the candidacy process. And we have spent, we've listened, groups and hearings and so forth. And we have talked, I cannot tell you how many meetings I've gone to Chicago and we've had, and now we're at the point of bringing that together and actually making some decisions. And it is really difficult. And I don't think I'm the only one who experiences this at a larger level. My sense is that Congress also are experiencing. And I'm wondering, why is it so difficult for us to make decisions? Is that we're trying to make sure we make everybody happy? We're trying to, as Reverend Wetter said, we're afraid of making mistakes. But what is it that you think keeps you all as leaders of your congregations from actually making the decisions about your future? How's that for a question? Or do you easily make decisions? Some do, but we can tell you a story or two about congregations that did not.
I have a couple of opinions about that.
That'd be
One
great.
is personalities get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is sometimes we're pushing beans rather than looking at rolling up our sleeves and working. We're more likely to sort the silverware drawer and say somebody puts the forks in the wrong place and that messes up the whole system. Or they don't clean the counter right, or they haven't cleaned the bathroom, or the pastor hasn't made a call to me and I'm not feeling very well. So I'm going to call somebody else, and rather than calling the pastor and say, I want you to listen to me. But all of those personality kinds of issues get in the way.
Yeah, it's so much easier, isn't it, to complain about what we don't like, what we see as the problems, than to actually say, not only have a suggestion of a way, but actually say, I will help change that. Yep. Well, it's nice to know I'm not the only one who experiences that. I have a lot of people who point out the things that, we do wrong as a Senate. So
if you see a problem, mention it, but have a solution, or at least a partial one.
Be part of,
be willing to be part of the solution. You may not have the answer, but be willing to at least be part of it, whatever that becomes. Yeah. Other thoughts on that? Because that's a great question. Why are we afraid? What keeps us from making decisions?
I think part of it is we're afraid to ruffle feathers.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, there might be disagreement over a decision, right? There might be some conflict, right?
I think sometimes it's also just it takes work, it takes effort to do something.
Yeah.
And often doing something is doing something different. So
Right.
it's easy just to fall back into, well, this is what we know, this is the pattern.
That's a good
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that fear of the unknown, right? We'd rather stick with
Yeah.
what we know, even though it's not working, but we know it, versus try something new that might actually work, right? But we don't know it will. And there's that fear of the unknown.
And it is scary. I mean, at Joplin, we've made a huge number of decisions
Yeah.
over the
Yep.
past few years, and it's scary.
Yeah.
And we don't know where everything's going yet, but
Yeah.
we'll keep experimenting and trying it out.
Well, and I think also what you're talking about, at least I find when we do try and make decisions, and because we don't know, and you mentioned this earlier in your presentation, that we go to, well, this might go wrong, and this might go wrong, and this might go wrong, and so we go down the rabbit hole, and it's amazing. We can every scenario, of what could go wrong, which then kind of immobilizes us, right? And so that fear and that worry about, are we going to get it right? But guess what, folks? We're not going to get it right. I mean, there is no magic, as you said, it's not about getting it right. It's about that making progress and continuing to move forward. And again, trusting that even if we get it wrong, right? The church is still in God's hands.
Absolutely.
And
Susan, I really liked what you said, because to me anyway, you sort of described vision. We're making progress toward what? Toward what we think we want it to look like.
Right. Or what God wants it to look like, right?
Right, right. It's always about,
It's always coming back to what God's up to, what's God's mission here, and how does that bring about the reign of God, right? That's the big picture one, right? That's the one that's way too big for all of us. But we can work in a microscopic level in our own little community about what might the reign of God look like. The other thing I want to bring up is a lot of times when we're making decisions, particularly about change, I think one of the fears we face is we're afraid because we think if we change something, that means we failed at what we've been doing, right? We're afraid of failure. And what I would like to propose to you is a lot of us have been doing the same thing over and over. And when we started, it was probably really good, right? And it probably worked. But over time, the world has changed, but we're still trying to do the same thing. And what if we tried something new, if it worked better, right? That doesn't mean whatever the old program or ministry or whatever, it doesn't mean it failed. It means it served its purpose. And now there is a new purpose, right, in the world that we must accomplish. Okay, we've made it this far because after a while we've progressed. We now need to make the next step. So it's not about what has failed; it's about what has served its purpose and where are we going from here. So I think there is that fear of, well, then what we did was wrong. Nope, absolutely not. What we did was right up until now or whenever, and now God's calling us to do something different. And I see that, you see that in organizations all the time. You see that in whether it's for-profit or nonprofit or faith communities. It is that fear of, oh, we must have failed. And healthy long-term organizations are constantly looking for what's that next thing. What do I do next? And they see that as a positive, not a negative, right? That goes back to the John Quincy things I shared with you from Coca-Cola. Always focus on, and Bishop just referenced it, always focused on what might go better, what might go right. And I think that's what God does, right? God has, we can never imagine, I think part of our problem is we can never imagine big enough for God's kingdom. We just can't imagine it because we just don't have that, right? And God said to us, your ways aren't my ways, So I always look at this as God is just revealing just a next piece of this incredible kingdom that we're called to be part of. And what if we could just experience a little bit more, right? So, yeah, that fear is a huge one.
I
Yeah,
think
so-
one other thing, sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
One of the other things I think is this is the way we've always done this.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But what I don't understand over the years, and I've been Lutheran my entire life, okay, I was confirmed, is that part of our DNA as Lutherans is a whole sense of Reformation, right?
Mhm.
I mean, we are a church of Reformation. That it is, and why, and Lutherans, have this reputation that really embrace, right? And Reverend Wetter, referred to some of these passages. Isn't there a thing about death and resurrection? I mean, didn't Jesus say, unless a grain of wheat falls into the, and dies or whatever? We hear that, but I don't know that we trust it.
Right.
There is a sense of, because you're right, if you're going to change, if you're going to make a decision, right, something different, there is a letting go of the way it has been. And there's grief in that, right? And I'm not sure we always acknowledge that.
Good point.
That
Yeah.
you're right. The people, oh, we can't, whatever, because we won't have that. Well, you're right. We won't have that. And so do we trust to let go? And again, going back to what is the purpose? Because in our work, and I don't mean to put people on the spot, I can't tell you the number of congregations. I really wonder, is this about the reign of God and participating in what God is doing in the community? Or is this about keeping our doors open so that
Right.
this building that's familiar to me, I can come at the same time to worship, talk about don't change worship times, don't change, because this is about me. And I'm not saying that we don't, to be individually fed, but guess what? It really isn't about you.
Right.
Church is not about us, like it's a club. Church is about equipping the body of Christ to participate in the world. And honestly, that is a frustration. I mean, we hang on so tight because this is ours. And I'll do a quick, I don't know if it's a horror story, but this is my urging us that we have got to do this work as hard as it is. Some of you know this story. You are aware that in our polity, how we understand ourselves to be church in the ELCA is that the congregation, you as a congregation, have a great deal of authority and responsibility. You make the decisions. I said this before about your building. You make the decisions about your budget. You make calling a pastor, yes, that person is vetted through the larger, but you call who you want to be your pastor. You hire your staff. So you have a great deal of authority, but with that, you have responsibility, right? To actually be church in your community. And we know things are challenging. And as congregations get smaller, it is not just about size, but there is a sense of resources, getting people on council, making decisions, keeping things moving. So we had a church in the St. Louis area in Webster Groves that they literally stopped functioning. They didn't have council meetings. They didn't have a congregational meeting. They didn't make decisions about the budget. The only reason, and during the pandemic, which we know was very hard, they simply stopped. The only reason that, they continued that is their utilities were kind of auto paid, although we discovered some, and they had a parsonage that somebody paid rent. And so they had money. And so, but they were doing nothing. And we got involved as a synod when we got a call from the city manager, the mayor, whatever. They called the Senate office to say, what's going on? There's this vacant building, nothing's happening. So it's like, okay. So we move in and we try and gather the few people and say, we need to make decisions, right? I know it's hard. it was Danish, right?
Danish.
Was it
yeah.
Danish? I mean, they had this heritage. The Danish society used to meet there. I mean, they were just, and again, my grandparents, were the architects. I get all that, but they absolutely refused to come together and actually make a decision about how they were going to function. And so at that point, there is in the Synod Constitution, in congregational constitutions in ours, we do have a responsibility to, it's called Synod preservation, that the ministry, we can't just say, well, whatever. And so we had to go in and we took over the congregation and we closed the congregation and we finally, if you want to have a story, talk to Rich Gates, because he got to come in at the end of this, talking with lawyers and, lawsuits and all of this. And we finally sold that building. The sad thing is that those original members were then not part of making decisions about the legacy of that ministry. Those of us that weren't part of that, we had to make decisions. We hear this loud and clear. As the bishop, as a synod, we do not want to do that. We want to empower you as congregations, as communities of faith in your communities, because people, your history, your tradition. You have to make those decisions. And what I tell congregations is, I am not going to come in and say, you need to close. Now, I may have an opinion, but I'm not going to say that to you. What I will say is you need to have a plan. At what point can you no longer be the church, your purpose, right? And again, what we tell people, if you wait, right, and you keep kicking the can down the road, that's kind of my metaphor, your options, the possibilities get smaller and smaller and smaller, so that you get to the point where, the Synod does have to come in and take over. Yeah. And so that's why, and as we said, this really is a time of transition. We know there are challenges. We know the culture is shifting. We know things are not the way they're going to be. So either we can throw up our hands and say, well, I guess we'll just kind of continue to whatever until, the last person, right, walks out the door. Mm-hmm. Or we can take a deep breath. And when I say deep breath, I think breathe in that spirit. We can open our eyes. We can say, okay, what is our budget? What are we doing with our building? What kind of leadership do we need? And let's take seriously what God is calling us to do. I don't want to close more churches. I think the message of the ELCA, and it's not about institutional loyalty. I'm getting a bit preachy here, but go with me. We have this message of grace and welcome and inclusion and participating in God's work in the world. We are a public church. That is an awesome message, my friends. I mean, talk about a purpose. We got it. I don't want to lose that. So whatever we can do to, look at how do we, and again, it's not size.
Mm-mm.
I mean, you can,
No, we have many small congregations that I would literally, not size, few people that are thriving. Yep. Because what they have done, there's the old saying, not to decide is to decide, right? If you either make the decision yourself or somebody will make it for you or something will. But we have congregations that have recognized who they are today, not what they used to be. They valued what they used to be, but they realized that God has transformed them into something new, smaller, maybe stronger, like I talked about earlier, and they've lived into that ministry. That's a thriving congregation. So when we talk about, you hear us talk about sustainable and thriving congregations and all that, it's not about size. you can be small and thriving. You can be big and thriving, but you can be big and falling apart and needing to close too. I mean, it's not about your size. I do believe when we get clear on our purpose and we can live into that, then we can be whatever we need to be, right? And so, yeah, we've got many congregations that are smaller that I would say are thriving, and I see congregations who think they have to close, and you get a phone call that because they've done this work, they're like, wow, we actually have a few new members, and giving is up. I mean, no, don't get me wrong, it's not like they're flush in money, but they see the rewards of that. The ministry is actually working because they're just doing God's work where they've been called to do it. And so that's what gets me excited. And that's what, because I'm with Bishop Candia, I've lived through a couple of those now where we've had to come in, and I hate those things. I do. That's not the church at its best.
Yeah, it's not what I thought I signed up for, right? And the other thing, the only way we're going to do this, and which is why I totally believe, yes, I'm the bishop of the synod, but I absolutely believe it is about being church together. Because what we're seeing more and more and more is collaborating, working together. And again, but that means that I have to let go of, it's going to be completely my way, right? To collaborate with others. Just think about the simple thing like a marriage, right? Two people coming together in a marriage. Now, those of you that are married, I'm sorry, but it's not completely one person's family tradition or the other person's, right? You've had to compromise, right? To build something better. Well, we're seeing that with congregations, and it doesn't mean that they've stopped being that. But for me, those are the exciting possibilities. And I'm just wondering what God is up to is that we really do have to take more seriously in this time and culture our purpose, right? We need to get clarity about that. And we need to start reaching across our own kind of silos and work together. Maybe that is a church that God is birthing in these years. None of that means it's easy. Please know. We recognize, because I love that personalities, right? We all have our personalities, and we all have our things, right? We have our things. And you get together with people. I mentioned this candidacy working group that I've been part of, a great group of people. But I tell you, every single person has an opinion about every single thing. So it's like, I get done with those meetings and I'm like, okay, I've used all night. But we cannot let that stop us from, again, taking a breath and moving forward. So that's kind of my spiel, which is why, so important. And we will work with you, if you need that outside voice, we love to come and work with councils. We love to come and have those conversations. Sometimes it's easier to have that outside perspective. I'm not, whether it's contemporary worship or traditional worship or this time worship or that, that we can kind of listen and ask those questions. We're happy to do that. Right. But we also recognize these are your communities. And we want you to feel equipped as leaders to start really, making decisions, asking those questions. Because I'm amazed, and one more thing, then I'll be quiet, at how many people, they don't know. It's like, oh, we didn't know the finances were that bad. Oh, we didn't know that. Oh, what do you mean you don't know? Yeah. We need to know. Know the budget of the Senate, Sometimes I wish I didn't know the budget of the Senate, but I know it. So, okay. We have 10 more minutes. Are there other, as we've been talking about this, questions, thoughts, wisdom, experiences that you want to share with one another?
As far as the purpose is concerned, is there a point where the purpose itself needs to change or be articulated in a different way, perhaps?
I think that, yes, the answer to that is yes. If you're always doing it, then you probably haven't quite gotten it, right? Purpose should last a long time.
Okay.
So like in the one example where I gave you of Disney, it lasted almost 100 years. And I still think they should have kept it personally, but that's, I'm not in the corporate world there and I don't know what their reasoning was, but good purpose statements last a long time. That doesn't mean you don't constantly, Ed, I think the better question there is, should we continue to evaluate, is this still our purpose, right? Absolutely. And if the answer is no, then by all means change it, right? Or adjust it. But if you're doing it all the time, my guess is you're probably just throwing stuff against the wall. And so,
Oh, I see.
but so, like I say, when in the last congregation I served, it took us almost a year to really develop what became the purpose statement, right? You play with things, you learn things, you test them, but when we finally got to feed the world and we realized how we could use that and how that could bring us all together, then we stuck with it. And I think that's still their statement. So yes, you should constantly evaluate it. And if it needs to be changed, then change it. But I would hope it doesn't. Your mission or strategies, whatever you want to call them, those will change constantly. Yeah. Yeah. And I see a couple of things in the chat here. I wanted to when we come up with a purpose statement, this is from Mike Kern. What are some tips for ingraining it into the culture of the congregation? Great question. Rather than patting ourselves on the back. Great question, Mike. So, again, my thinking is, first of all, when you do that, it ought to be with a wide group of leadership, right? And it should be done. This purpose statement ought to come literally out of the congregation in the sense of we've listened and gathered this data. And so for me, it's always about, we talked about this and this is what we heard from you. We talked about this and this is what you wanted to do. And as we did that, these are the words that came to light. These are the whatevers. These are the statements that came, and this is where we've ended up. So that's one, that's sharing it. But then as far as ingratiating it into the congregation, I think we need to find ways to live into it, right? How will, in my case, how will we feed the world? What are some of the things we'll do? And in everything we did, we talked about this is feeding the world. Sometimes, as I said, it wasn't just literal bringing groceries. We talked about feeding the world as sharing the gospel, right? That's feeding, spiritual. We had different programming. So part of it is then begin to practice it, living into that purpose. And in everything we do, we've got to share it. It should be in our bulletins. I love the notion. I think it was Belinda. I think you said you make this statement every week as you leave, right? Let us make Christ known. It becomes something that we can all, that mantra that we have. So I think there's a variety of ways you do that. One is practice it, live into it. Everybody's not going to like it up front.
Another way to do that prior to coming on staff, congregation I served in Colorado, we actually, our purpose, and I don't know if this is exact, a place to grow, that we kind of, that
Right.
we were going to be a place to grow. And so we actually looked at our whole structure. How we have a committee for this, a committee for that, how many committees do we have, right?
Right.
I mean, we have congregations of 20 people that have a dozen committees, right?
Oh,
And so we actually, we did that and how are we growing? And we actually restructured and we went down to like 4 teams.
Yep.
We looked at different, and so our structure, I mean, we still have the council, but our structure was around that, place to grow. And it, like the property, the folks, they put in, we actually had a garden. We did a raised garden. We were on a property, a community garden. We did the garden. And so that it really got into it because it became part of our organizational structure as well.
Right.
And so that, again, going back to your authority and responsibility in the Constitution, do you know that everything about how you structure committees or whatever, that is not in the required provisions of the model Constitution? Those are up for you all to design the structure that fits best for you. There aren't a lot of congregations that really take that seriously. I'll just be honest with you, but that's a way to do it. Start there. And
Absolutely.
how are you organized? What committees do you have? What is their purpose? And if there's not a purpose, there is nothing that says you have to have every single one of these. Well, we always had a whatever committee.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Structure, your organizational structure is a great place to start. I mean, again, we did that at my last congregation. We did that, didn't change the council, because that's, that
Right.
is mandated. But all the programming or all the committees we had all then focused around this purpose statement. And then as we lived into the mission, that's how we did that. So yeah, structure is critical. So yeah, there's a variety of ways to do it.
T-shirts that have the logo on them, and all
Yeah.
that also. I will say, a little bit of swag, but, so.
But again, as Bishop said, we're here.
Mhm.
I love working with councils on stuff like this, or your leadership teams. So please reach out to us as you begin to work on some of this. Reach out to each other. Hopefully you've made some connections if you've been on all 4 weeks. Talk to each other. We're doing more and more of that and collaborating with congregations. I was excited last week here in Kansas City. We had 13, if I counted right, 12 or 13 congregation leaders and casters together to talk, right? Bishop, wasn't there about that many?
Yep. Yeah, I think, well, Mike, you were there.
Yeah,
I
Mike.
can't remember how many. Yep.
About 13 different I mean, I was trying to count various pastors that were there, and I know there were more than one or whatever, but that to me is exciting because we got together just to talk about what does collaboration look like. We've been doing it in St. Louis with a number of you in there. Some of you are involved in more rural areas, and you've been doing it for years. Collaboration is critical. So share ideas with each other, talk to each other. With Zoom, you don't even have to be in the same community, right? We can meet from opposite sides of the synod and share ideas. So there's a variety of ways to do these things. There's not just one. But please remember we need to start making decisions in the church about where we're headed and why we're headed there. And that purpose it starts with our purpose. So